My son didn't shout. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He just looked at me across the dinner table, shrugged, and said it plain and calm. "Dad, you eat for free here." Nobody said a word after that. My grandson, Perry, stared at his plate. Pauline, my daughter-in-law, let out a short laugh like it was a joke, and I felt something go very quiet inside my chest. I didn't argue. I didn't get up angry. I just smiled, put my napkin on the table, and walked out to the hallway. Pulled out my phone, dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Neil," I said, keeping my voice low. "I think it's time." That one phone call changed everything. "My name is Carl Merritt. I'm 67 years old, retired civil engineer, 35 years designing water treatment systems for the county. I'm not a man who talks much about his feelings, never have been. But I'm going to tell you this story because if you've ever been made to feel like a burden inside your own family, you'll understand why it matters. Shirley and I were married for 38 years. She taught 4th grade. I drew blueprints. We weren't rich, but we built something solid together. A brick house outside Cleveland, a modest retirement account, and a son we were proud of, Brent. He was 41 years old when he said those words to me at that dinner table, and if you'd asked me 10 years earlier whether that moment could ever happen, I would have laughed at the idea because Brent had once been the kid who scraped his knee on the driveway and came running straight to me. Shirley was the careful one in our marriage, more careful than most people realized. While I spent decades at the county office with blueprints and pipe schematics, she was the one managing everything at home. She balanced the checkbook. She set up the retirement accounts. She kept files on everything in a cabinet in the back bedroom that I always teased her about. "You're running a law firm back there." I used to say she'd just look at me over her glasses. Someone has to. Before she got sick, she sat me down at the kitchen table one evening with a stack of folders and a legal pad covered in her neat handwriting. She said she'd been working with an estate attorney named Neil Ashford. She'd set up something called a family trust. I was the primary beneficiary. All the major assets were in it: the house, the savings, the retirement accounts. "If anything ever feels wrong after I'm gone," she said, "call Neil. He has everything." I told her she was being dramatic. She just found out about the cancer 2 months earlier and I wasn't ready to talk about after. She didn't argue. She just slid the folder across the table and said, "You trust people too easily, Carl. That's why I'm doing this." I put the folder in the cabinet with all her other files and didn't think much about it again. I should have surely passed 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. And after 38 years of sharing a house with someone, the silence that comes after is the kind you can't really describe to another person. Every room had her in it. Her reading glasses on the end table. Her handwriting on the grocery list still stuck to the fridge. The coffee mug she always used still sitting in the dish rack because I couldn't bring myself to put it away. For the first few months, I barely left the house. Brent called regularly, and at first, his voice sounded genuinely worried. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone out there all the time." I told him I was fine, which wasn't entirely true, but it was what I said. Then one Sunday, he drove up from Columbus and sat down with me at the kitchen table where Shirley and I had eaten thousands of meals. He said Pauline had already looked into options. They had a spare bedroom. The grandkids, Perry, who was 10, and Diane, who was 8, would love having their grandfather around, and I wouldn't have to deal with maintaining the old house on my own anymore. "You've got a big yard, Dad. The gutters need work. The furnace is old. It's a lot for one person." He wasn't wrong, and grief has a way of making things sound reasonable that you'd normally think twice about. Within 6 months, the Cleveland house was listed and sold. Brent helped coordinate most of the paperwork. The sale proceeds went into accounts he said he'd help manage for me. I didn't study the details the way I should have. Getting through each day felt like enough work on its own. By the following spring, I packed what was left of my life into a moving truck and drove to Columbus. Brent and Pauline welcomed me warmly that first week. The kids ran out to the driveway when I pulled up. Perry wanted to show me his bicycle. Diana grabbed my hand and walked me through the house like she was giving a tour. For a few weeks, maybe a month, it actually felt like family. The first signs were small enough that I told myself I was imagining them. Pauline ran that house like a project manager. Meals were planned out. Groceries were tracked to the dollar. She knew exactly what was in every cabinet and when it needed restocking. I respected that it was her house. But little by little, I started noticing that I was asking permission for things I'd done automatically my whole life. One afternoon, I offered to drive Perry to soccer practice. Pauline said she preferred to handle school pickups herself. Fine. I started doing my laundry in the mornings when nobody was around. Pauline mentioned casually that utility rates were lower in the evenings. Fine. I made grilled cheese for the kids one afternoon after school because they came in hungry and I was already in the kitchen. Pauline walked in, looked at the pan on the stove, and said, "You don't need to cook, Carl. I keep track of what we use in here." I said, "I was sorry," and wiped down the counter. Fine. What I didn't say out loud was that back in Cleveland, I'd been making my own meals for 67 years. I'd been running a household longer than Pauline had been alive. But I kept that to myself because it was their house and I was the guest. Brent worked long hours. Even when he was home, he was half somewhere else, phone in hand, scrolling through something. At dinner, he'd ask how my day was. I'd say, "Quiet." And that was usually the end of it. The conversations we used to have when he was younger, about his work, about football, about whatever project I was tinkering with in the garage, those conversations had gotten very short. The only people in that house who treated me exactly the same as always were the grandkids. Perry would drag me out to the garage after school to look at whatever he was working on. Diane would crawl up next to me on the couch with her school reading and ask me to help with words she didn't know. One evening, she leaned against my arm and said, "Grandpa, you explain things better than Dad." I laughed and told her not to say that too loud. But even those small moments were starting to sit differently with me, because by that point, I'd already begun to feel it. That slow, quiet shift from being family to being a guest who had stayed past his welcome. I started hearing the word expenses more often, not directed at me, not openly, but I'd catch pieces of conversations between Brent and Pauline late in the evenings. The mortgage, the school costs, utilities up again this month. One night, I was walking back downstairs to get my phone, and I heard Pauline say, "3 extra loads of laundry a week isn't nothing." I stood in the hallway longer than I should have. Then I went back upstairs without my phone. The next morning at breakfast, everything looked normal. Pauline made coffee and asked Diane about her science project. Brent talked about traffic on the highway. Nobody said anything unusual, but something had shifted for me overnight. For the first time since I moved in, I felt like a line item in someone else's budget. I tried harder after that. I vacuumed the living room when nobody was home. I organized the kids' backpacks before school. I took Perry to the park on Saturdays so Brent and Pauline could have a quieter morning. Pauline thanked me each time, but the thanks always sounded the way you thank a neighbor who shovels your walk once. Polite, formal, not the way you talk to family. Then the mail started disappearing. It happened gradually enough that I didn't notice it right away. The mail truck came around 4 rounds every afternoon. I'd hear it from wherever I was in the house, and by the time I got to the box, it was already empty. Brent got there first most days. When I asked if anything had come for me, he always said the same thing. "Nothing important, Dad." Same words, same tone every time. One afternoon, Brent was still at work, and Pauline had taken the kids to a dentist appointment. I got to the mailbox before anyone else. 3 envelopes, an advertisement for a furniture store, a credit card offer addressed to Pauline, and one addressed clearly to me, Carl Merritt from First National Bank of Cleveland. The same bank Shirley and I had used for most of our marriage. I stood in the driveway and opened it. It was a statement. Most of the account language meant little to me without context, but one line stopped me cold. Transfer authorization pending. Underneath that line was a dollar amount. A number large enough that Shirley and I had talked about it specifically when we were planning for retirement. The kind of number you don't move around without a conversation first. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, just as Pauline's car turned into the driveway. "Anything interesting?" she called out, lifting Diane down from the back seat. "Just advertisements," I said. That was the first lie I'd told in my son's house. It tasted strange going out, but I held it together and walked back inside. And that night, I sat at the small desk in my bedroom and read the letter 3 more times until I understood exactly what I was looking at. That evening, I asked Brent, as casual as I could manage, whether he'd been keeping up with the accounts from the Cleveland house sale. "Yeah," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Why?" "Just wondering if everything settled out okay." "It's all taken care of, Dad. Taken care of." I let it go that night, but I didn't sleep well. I kept coming back to something Shirley had said when she was putting those folders together at the kitchen table. "You trust people too easily, Carl. That's why I'm doing this." The next morning, while Brent was at work and Pauline was dropping the kids at school, I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone and looked up the number for Neil Ashford's office. His firm had handled Shirley's estate planning for years, though I'd only met him once briefly at the closing of her will. Shirley always handled those meetings herself. The receptionist answered on the second ring. I told her who I was. She put me on a brief hold. Then Neil's voice came on calm and even. "Carl Shirley told me you might call eventually." That stopped me. She did. Her exact words were, "He'll wait too long, but he'll call. What's going on?" I told him about the statement, the pending transfer, the mail I'd been getting to second, the accounts I'd never personally agreed to touch. Neil listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Come in tomorrow. Bring the letter." Neil Ashford's office was a small brick building on a quiet street wedged between a dental clinic and an insurance agency. Nothing fancy. Shirley had picked him specifically because she said she didn't trust attorneys with big offices and marble lobbies. He read the bank statement twice without saying anything. Then he set it down and leaned back. "Carl, do you know what the Merritt Family Trust is?" Shirley mentioned it. She said it protected our assets. It does. And you are the sole primary beneficiary. That means any major financial transfer, anything above the discretionary limit, requires your signature, your direct authorization. I looked at him. "Nobody has asked me to authorize anything." "That," he said, "is exactly the problem." He pulled out a thick folder. The original trust documents Shirley had filed. He walked me through the structure carefully. Brent had been named secondary trustee, which gave him limited access. He could handle routine account maintenance. He could make smaller withdrawals within a set discretionary limit, but a transfer of the size listed on that statement was well outside those limits. It required me. "Someone submitted a reallocation request to the bank," Neil said. "The bank is now waiting on your signature to complete it. Until you sign, nothing moves. What happens to the money if I do sign?" Neil chose his words carefully. "It would move into a new account structure where you would no longer be the sole controlling party." I sat with that for a moment. Outside his window, traffic moved along the street. People walking, carrying coffee, going about their afternoon. Everything looked completely ordinary. "Shirley built this thing so nobody could take the wheel away from me." I said, "Yes," Neil said, "that's exactly what she did." He told me the wisest move right now was not to confront anyone. Not yet. He said, if I went in directly accusing Brent and Pauline of anything, they'd push back immediately and frame the transfer as routine estate management. But if I stayed quiet and patient and let the situation develop naturally, their own actions would tell the full story. "Watch," he said. "Listen, don't tip anyone off and call me when something new happens." I drove back to the house that afternoon, knowing something I hadn't known that morning. I was not powerless. I had simply been kept in the dark, and there's a real difference between those two things. Over the next week, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. I noticed how often the conversations between Brent and Pauline circled back to money, the mortgage, school costs, a home repair they'd been putting off, and mixed in, among all of it, certain words that made my ears sharpen. Transfer timeline, deadline, before the end of the month. One evening, I walked past the living room and heard Pauline say to Brent in a low voice, "As long as it clears before the end of the month, we're fine." I kept walking and didn't slow my step. Then Perry gave me the next piece without realizing it. He came home from school on a Thursday and found me in the garage working on his bicycle chain, which had been skipping gears. He sat on an overturned bucket and watched me work, talking the way 10-year-olds do, cycling through 3 different topics before landing on the one that mattered. "Mom told Diane that after the transfer, Grandpa won't have to worry about money anymore," he said, spinning the rear wheel while I held the derailleur. I kept my eyes on the chain. "She did?" "Yeah. She said everything's going to be simpler." "That's good," I said. I finished fixing the chain, sent Perry inside to wash up for dinner, and called Neil that evening from the back porch with the door closed behind me. Neil listened. Then he said, "Good. Now we let them come to you." Neil's plan was simple. He said Pauline believed I didn't understand the financial details. As long as she believed that she'd keep explaining things to me in the way people explain things to someone they've already written off, and if she explained it to me directly, her own words would become the record. "Play dumb," he said. "Let her talk." A few days later, I got my chance. Pauline was at the kitchen counter going through paperwork on a Saturday morning. Brent had taken the kids to a soccer game. I came in, poured myself a coffee, and set the bank statement on the counter beside her like I just found it confusing. "Pauline, can you help me make sense of this? The bank sent it, and I can't follow all the account language." She picked it up. Her expression stayed neutral, but something in her posture shifted slightly. The way a person shifts when they realize a conversation is going the direction they hoped it would. "It's a restructuring of the accounts," she said, keeping her voice patient and even moving things into a joint management structure so Brent and I can handle everything more efficiently going forward. "Joint management," I repeated. "So your name would be on the account too?" "Yes, it makes the day-to-day much easier to manage, and Shirley set it up that way originally." A short pause. Just a half second, but I caught it. "The structure is being updated to reflect current needs," she said. I nodded slowly like I was taking that in. I thanked her and told her that made sense. Then I went back to the garage. My phone had been in my shirt pocket the entire time, recording app running. I downloaded it the night before and practiced using it twice before breakfast. I sent the audio file to Neil that afternoon. He called me back within the hour. "That's exactly what we needed," he said. "She stated clearly that she intends to be added to the account structure. She didn't mention your authorization. She didn't mention the trust. She presented it as already decided. Is that enough? Combined with the pending transfer request in the statement? Yes. It establishes intent. Now we wait for the authorization documents to arrive. When they do, call me before you do anything." The envelope came 4 days later. Thick, formal, my name printed cleanly on the front. First National Bank of Cleveland. I recognized the weight of it before I even opened it. Inside were several pages. The heading on the first page confirmed everything Neil had prepared me for. Trust Asset Reallocation Authorization. Below that, the transfer amount, the same number I'd seen on the earlier statement, and at the bottom of the last page, a signature line with my name printed underneath it. Primary beneficiary authorization required. I put the envelope in the drawer of my bedside table and called Neil. That same evening, Brent came home and mentioned casually that some financial paperwork had probably arrived in the mail. He said it while he was setting his bag down by the door, not even looking at me directly. "Just need your signature, Dad. Routine stuff." We sat down to dinner. Pauline had made pot roast. Perry talked about a kid at school who'd broken his arm on the monkey bars. Diane showed me a drawing she'd made in art class. Everything looked completely normal. But I noticed the way Pauline glanced toward me twice during the meal. Quick and measuring, the way you check on something you're waiting to close. After dinner, Brent brought the envelope to the kitchen table. He'd gone and gotten it from where I'd left it, which told me he already knew exactly where it was. He set it in front of me and put a pen beside it. "Nothing complicated," he said. "Just the account update." I picked up the envelope, opened it slowly, read through the first page while Brent stood across the table with his arms loose at his sides, trying to look relaxed. Pauline leaned against the counter behind him. Perry and Diane were still at the table, not paying attention to the adults. I read down to the signature line, looked at my name printed there. Then I set the pen down. "I want to talk about it first," I said. Brent's shoulders tightened. "There's nothing to talk about, Dad. It's standard paperwork. How much does this transfer move?" His jaw shifted. He said the number. "And after it moves, whose name is on the new account structure?" Pauline stepped forward. "It's a joint management setup. It makes things easier for everyone." "Easier for who?" I asked. Nobody answered that one. I looked at Brent. I spoke with Neil Ashford. The kitchen went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Pauline's hand stopped moving on the counter. Brent stared at me. "When?" He said last week and again this week after the recording. Pauline's face changed. "What recording?" "The conversation we had in here on Saturday morning. When you explained the joint management structure to me, I kept my voice level. Neil has the audio." Brent looked at Pauline. Pauline looked at the floor for just a moment, then back up at me. "Carl," she said carefully, "we were trying to simplify things." "I know what you were trying to do," I said, "and I know what Shirley built this trust to prevent." I slid the unsigned envelope back across the table toward Brent. "I'm not signing this tonight," I said, "or any other night." The room stayed quiet for a long moment after I said that. Perry looked up from the table. Diane had stopped drawing. Brent stood there with the unsigned envelope in front of him and didn't say anything right away. Pauline recovered first. "Carl, we have been managing everything for you. The accounts, the paperwork, the taxes, all of it. We thought this was the logical next step." "I appreciate that," I said, "but there's a difference between managing something for someone and moving it out from under them." Brent finally spoke. His voice was quieter than before. "Dad, we're carrying a lot. The mortgage, the school costs, everything. We thought if the trust was restructured, we could stabilize things. Get out from under some of the debt." "I know you're carrying a lot," I said. "Then why won't you help us?" That question sat in the air between us. I understood why he asked it. I even understood the pressure behind it. But I also knew what Shirley would have said. She'd have said, "There's a difference between helping your son and handing him the wheel if you needed help." I said, "You could have sat down with me and asked. Honestly, like adults, that's not what happened here." Brent looked at the table. Pauline folded her arms and looked toward the window. "I think the kids should go upstairs," I said. Brent nodded and sent Perry and Diane up without an argument. When their footsteps faded, the kitchen felt a lot bigger. Pauline tried once more. "We weren't trying to take anything from you, Carl. We were trying to make things work." "I believe that's what you told yourselves," I said. "But Shirley didn't build that trust because she thought everything would always work out fine. She built it because she understood that pressure changes people, that even good intentions can drift when money gets tight. Nobody pushed back on that." 3 days later, Neil sent a formal notice to the bank. The pending transfer was flagged and stopped. The request to add Pauline as co-manager of the trust was reviewed and denied. The Merritt Family Trust remained exactly as Shirley had structured it, with me as the sole controlling beneficiary. No changes, no reallocations, nothing moved. Brent came to my room that evening. He sat in the chair by the window and looked at the floor for a while before he said anything. "I should have talked to you first," he said. "Yes, you should have. It wasn't all Pauline. I wanted it too. I convinced myself it was the right move." "I know." He was quiet for a minute. "You're not going to help us with the debt. I'm going to keep the trust the way your mother built it. If you need help, we talk about it directly. All of us together with Neil in the room if needed, but it starts with an honest conversation, not a signature on a form you hoped I wouldn't read." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "I shouldn't have said what I said at dinner. The free thing. No, you shouldn't have." I was frustrated. I didn't mean it the way it came out. I looked at him for a moment. He was 41 years old, and he looked tired in a way I recognized. The way a man looks when he's been carrying something too heavy for too long and made a bad decision trying to put it down. "I know you didn't," I said. "But you said it, and those things don't disappear just because you didn't mean them." He nodded again. "Are you going to leave?" I thought about that. The spare bedroom, the garage where Perry kept his bicycle, Diane's drawings on the refrigerator, the oak tree in the backyard they'd planted the year they moved in. "This is my home too, Brent." I said that's not something that changes because things got hard. Pauline never said much to me directly after that night. Things between us became polite in a careful, deliberate way. The kind of polite that means something has been settled and neither side is pushing further. That was fine with me. I wasn't looking for an apology from her. I was looking for a boundary, and now we both knew where it was. The trust stayed intact. My account stayed in my name, and every afternoon around 4 Suzo, I was the one who walked out to the mailbox first. Shirley used to say I trusted people too easily. She was right, but she also loved me enough to spend years quietly building something that would protect me on the day my trust ran out. She didn't do it because she doubted Brent. She did it because she understood something about human nature that I had to learn the hard way. When people feel pressure, they start looking for exits, and sometimes the person closest to them looks like the easiest door. The trust was never really about money. It was about making sure I'd never have to trade my dignity for a roof over my head. Shirley made sure of that long before I ever needed it. That's the thing about someone who plans ahead. You don't always know what they were protecting you from until the day you actually need the protection. Thanks for watching my video. Like and subscribe.